Good morning, everybody. Hello and welcome. I'm Louise. I'm head of membership at TPAS. Delighted to have you all with us on our first day of National Involvement Week. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for hopefully starting the week off on such a positive note. So this session, as you probably know, is all about the regulator, and I'm delighted we've got Jack Smith with us, who's the Assistant Director at the Regulator of Social Housing, and he's going to do a presentation, and then there's going to be some time afterwards for some questions as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. Hopefully you are on mute at the moment. That's not because we don't like you or anything. It's just that the background noise can be quite difficult. So if you're not on mute, if you could pop yourself on mute, that would be wonderful. And also, as I've said, we are recording this meeting. And if you're interested, the slides will be available at a later date for download on our TPAS website as well. So you will get a copy of those if you would like to have it. Okay, I think we're just about ready then to get going. So I'm going to introduce you to Jack, and over to yourself, Jack, to take it from here.
Great. Thank you very much, Louise. Hello, everyone. I'm Jack Smith. As Louise says, I'm the Assistant Director for Assessment and Tenant Engagement at the Regulator. I'm just going to share my screen for the first little bit to show you the slides, and then it'll be about 15 minutes, and then we can open up for questions. So let me just get this to the right place. Right, can everybody, is that working, Louise?
It is indeed, yeah. All looks good to me.
Okay, fab. So hi everyone, I'm really pleased to be here for the start of the TPAS Involvement Week 2025, because we've got a real range of people here today, people who've probably heard me speak before at various TPAS events, but also some people who might not have come to those or heard from us as the regulator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a bit of what it is that we do and kind of why we do it, and then try and talk to you a bit about why that makes a difference to the day-to-day work of involvement for engaged tenants. So that pithy little thing on the screen is the shortest description we have of what it is that we do at the Regulator. And I think it contains lots of really helpful stuff about what we do. But what I'm going to do is unpack that slightly for you to kind of say, what does that mean in practice? So what does it mean when we say we regulate social landlords? What does it mean when we say we drive them to make improvements? So I'm going to start with the things that we do. These are the 5 big things that we do as a regulator. We start, as so many regulators do, by setting standards. So if you're registered with us as a social housing landlord, you have to meet the standards that we set. It's not a choice, it's a statutory obligation, and that means that it carries real weight for landlords. One thing that all regulators work, not all regulators, lots of regulators work like this. And one of the things that the regulators that use standards, so setting out the requirements that we expect from the people that we regulate, is that act in itself goes quite a long way, because most businesses and most organizations that are regulated try to achieve the things that are asked of them. So recently we just changed the what we talk about as our consumer standards. So the things that we require landlords to do to improve the safety and quality of homes and the way in which they engage with their tenants. And just setting those standards, we've seen landlords change the way in which they're behaving to respond to them. The next thing we do is inspection. So we go and check. So we don't just assume that everyone will be responding to those standards. So we go and check where landlords are delivering the outcomes of the standards. We typically do this every 4 years for landlords who have more than 1,000 homes. And you'll have seen our inspection judgments coming out there on our website if you want to go and see them. We're about just under halfway through the program now. So there's a lot out there. Your landlord may well have have had an inspection and may have told you about the outcome. The next thing we do is gather data. So we don't just go every 4 years to a landlord and then do nothing in between. Every year, and for private registered providers, actually every quarter we collect financial data, but every year we collect data on the information about condition of homes, on tenant satisfaction, on the budgets that people are setting, on the level of compliance with kind of legally required health and safety checks that landlords are doing. And we bring all of that data into the regulator and look at it on a regular basis. And then if we see something that concerns us in that data, or if somebody tells us about something that's happening at a landlord, that might be the landlord themselves. We have a process by which they can make self-referrals, or that might be a group of tenants, that might be somebody working in the local area, that might be an individual tenant telling us something about their wider landlord and the work that they're doing. That might be a whistleblower. Any of those things can lead us to go and do an investigation. We call that responsive engagement, but that's not really a word that people use in the real world. So we talk about investigations as well. And then finally, if we, through the inspections or the investigations, find any concerns at a landlord, we have processes in place where we look to drive improvement at those landlords. We do have powers that we can use, but our model is built on the premise that the best thing that can happen is for a landlord to recognize it's got problems, take the steps to change, and deliver that change in conjunction with its tenants. We talk about that as our co-regulatory approach. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So those are the things that we do. I'm going to tell you a bit about how we work. So this slide is about as management speaky as I get. So I'll try and tell you a bit more about what these things actually mean in practice. So we set these out as our way of working so everyone can understand how we work and knows what to expect from us. It's really important as a regulator that people are sure about what they're going to get from you, so they know how to respond to the things you're asking them to do. So at landlord level is the starting point. So we work, and our judgments are about the landlord as a whole. And that's really important for two reasons. One, it means that even if we find issues with the landlord and we say that there are failings in delivering some of our standards, they might be doing some good stuff elsewhere. I think that's really important to say, particularly for those of you who are currently involved with your landlord or engaged tenants. Just because we find an issue somewhere in a landlord doesn't mean that we're saying that everything that happens there is bad. We talk about that landlord level outcome, and we have 3 scores for our landlords: one for governance, one for viability, so their financial health, and one for their consumer issues. Those are overall judgments. So just remember that that doesn't always mean that everything, if we gave someone a low score across those judgments, it doesn't mean that everything that's going on in that landlord is bad. And vice versa, if we give them a good judgment, it doesn't mean that everything's perfect. And because we work at landlord level, we're not the organisation that deals with individual concerns that tenants have about their home and the way the landlord is handling their complaints. The Housing Ombudsman Service does that. And we have a relationship with them where they share data with us and tell us about the landlords where they've got most concerns. But if you had a specific problem with your landlord about what was happening, that would be something for the Housing Ombudsman to deal with. We're the regulator, look at what's happening at a landlord level. The next purple box you've got there is co-regulatory, and that means that we don't run social housing. We at the regulator, there's actually relatively few of us. There are around 4 million social homes in this country. There are nearly 1,000 landlords who are on our register. There's just under 300 people work at the regulator. So we don't attempt to run social housing. That's the landlord's job. And we don't police every single detail of what's happening in a landlord, because that would be incredibly resource intensive. Instead, what we do is we rely on open and transparent relationships between the landlord and ourselves, and we set standards that require landlords to be open and transparent with their tenants. So that model, we talk about being co-regulatory. So we expect landlords to come and tell us if they've got problems. If we go and find issues and a landlord hasn't told us, they can expect a worse response from us because of that. So the idea is that we are trying to promote and drive improvement without directly doing it ourselves, but getting the landlords to do it. We're risk-based. You'll hear people talk a lot about risk-based. That kind of comes out in two ways for the way that we do our regulation. We're most likely to focus on where things are going wrong. So what we don't do is talk often about good practice and best practice in the sector. That's not our role. We're looking at where issues are. And it also means that we focus on the elements of problems that have the largest chance of harming individual tenants or groups of tenants. So you'll often see our judgments are really heavily focused on the health and safety elements of landlord's performance, but also on financial risks, because if the landlord fails financially, then all of those homes are lost. These last two, I said they're a bit management speaky. These two are particularly jargon filled, I think, but assurance based is another way of saying that landlords need to show us that they're meeting our standards and that they need to do that with evidence. So it's not reassurance. They can't just say everything's fine. They need to show us with evidence. But what we're doing is our starting place is to go and ask the landlord, how are you delivering the services that we expect you to in our standards? And then the last one is outcomes focused. And what this means is that we don't tell landlords what they need to do. We don't tell them what they need to have in their policies. We don't tell them exactly which policies they need to have, bar a couple. What we do is we tell them what outcomes we expect. So we expect homes to be safe. That means we expect landlords to deliver the health and safety checks that they need to do. How they do that is something that they need to decide for themselves in conjunction with their tenants. And that's definitely the case for tenant involvement. We say to landlords, you need to engage your tenants, and we'll talk about what we tell them now, but we don't tell them precisely what it is that we expect them to do. So let's talk about involvement and tenants. So this is our standard for engagement with tenants. It's very clear what landlords need to do. They must take tenants' views into account in their decision making about how landlord services are delivered and communicate how tenants' views have been considered. That is our headline standard, the top thing that landlords must do. It's not optional, it's a must for all landlords. And I can hear people out there thinking, but that's a bit vague, Jack. What do you actually mean by take tenants' views into account? So what we do at the regulator is the next level down in our regulatory framework is about what we call our specific expectations. There's a few of them on the screen here, and they really provide the detail of what it is that landlords have to do in order to meet the standards that we set. So you can see there that what we mean by tenant engagement is that landlords must give tenants a wide range of meaningful opportunities to influence and scrutinise strategies, policies and services. There's another one on there that says that landlords must provide accessible support that meets the diverse needs of tenants. So that means that we expect landlords to not just provide opportunities to engage, but make sure that they're supporting all tenants to be able to take part in those opportunities. And finally, I'll just highlight that last one that's on the screen, that this isn't a static requirement. We brought the standards in, we said landlords had to have a way of engaging with their tenants, and then that's it. What we're expecting landlords to do is regularly consider the ways that they improve and tailor their approach to delivering services, including tenant involvement and engagement. So what we're expecting landlords to do is not sit still, but think about how they can continue to improve that. So that was all a lot of detail. And if you want to go away with one message from what it is that the regulator expects landlords to do around involvement and engagement, it's these words on the screen. So we expect landlords to have a wide range of opportunities. That means lots of different kinds of things that work in that context. And this is why we don't set specific rules about whether someone has a scrutiny panel or someone has estate walks or someone has a particular way of doing regional groups. But what we expect all of the landlords to do is have a wide range of opportunities, and not just one thing. They need to be meaningful. All of you on this call know what tokenistic engagement looks like, and so do we. We're expecting landlords to deliver something that is capable of affecting change. And then the final bit here is about influence and scrutiny. So if you think about tenant involvement, what we're asking landlords to do is make sure that that tenant involvement works for both influencing, so changing things before they happen, and scrutinizing, making sure that the things that landlords have said is going to happen is delivered. Now, I just want to leave you on this delightful picture of a field full of mud, because for me, we're talking about involvement all of this week in the TPAS Involvement Week, and involvement is an act of saying, I want things to change and I want to help as part of that. You're all here because you put your hand up to be part of the hard work that's being done to improve social housing across this country. Whether you're working with your landlord to influence change, whether you're working with them to scrutinise services, whether you're just seeking to get involved in whichever way you can, or maybe you're here as a landlord who's helping support tenants to do those things, you're the ones doing the hard work. The regulator's job is not to be in the field doing the hard work with you all, it's to put a fence around the field. So if we weren't here, there would be some landlords who would be out there doing this work anyway. What the job of the regulator is and how it connects to what you all want to do day to day is to put that parameter around the field and say to every landlord, actually, you've got to be in there working with your tenants to make sure that the changes that they want to see are happening in their social housing. So what you do in that field, how you work together, the things that you choose to grow together in that field, that's entirely up to you. Our job as a regulator is to just make sure that landlords are there doing that work with you. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I hope I can see you all again. Louise, I think
Perfect.
over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for that, Jack. A really sort of helpful guide. And I love the last slide about the field and the fence. I think that was really helpful. So thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, I'm just going to see if we've got any questions that have come into the chat, and then we will open it up for people who may have questions via raising their hand using the Zoom functions at the bottom of the screen. So I think we've got a question that came in from, I think it was Sue, about submissions that you're receiving, Jack, and whether you get to know whether they've been confirmed as being discussed with the tenant body or not.
So it depends slightly on what the submissions are. So let's talk about this in two bits. So we get data in on a kind of a regular annual basis that is mostly about accounting things. So we're looking at budgets, we're looking at the financial viability of landlords, we're looking at tenant satisfaction measures. So what were the outcomes of the scores for those surveys? Those processes have quality checks in. We do quality checks at our end to make sure that the landlord's giving us accurate data. So we wouldn't expect those to necessarily come with any kind of confirmation from a tenant body. When we do our inspections, what we do is we ask landlords for lots of assurance around the information to show us that they're meeting our standards. And when we do that piece of work, there's kind of two ways in which we want to understand how tenants view that. The first is kind of through the paperwork. We talk to landlords about saying, when you send this in, tell us what your structures are, tell us where these policies have been, tell us how tenants have been involved. And then when we're on site, we'll talk to the engaged tenants or a group of engaged tenants from across the landlord and ask them about their experiences of the things that we've seen. So that's the way that we test it. If anyone's concerned that things have been sent to us that don't reflect the views of a group of engaged tenants or their experiences, that's one of the things we'd be really happy to hear about. Where we've got our referrals process that's available on our website, that's a thing that people can come and tell us about.
Right. Thank you for that, Jack. Marion's popped a question in the chat about the regulator assessing how a landlord's doing on specific projects. I know it tends to look at the bigger picture, but Marion's asking what happens when landlords have maybe failed on specific projects. She's obviously experienced something very bad in her home and the strain's left her quite unwell. So any thoughts on what the regulator, if anything, could do with that in terms of specific projects rather than the bigger picture, I guess, Jack?
Yeah, thanks. And firstly, Marion, I'm really sorry that you've had that experience. That's not, so just at personal level, that's not what I hope that you were going through. I talked a bit about that difference between the regulator and the ombudsman. So the first place to start, where if it's something that's in your home that's gone wrong, the first place to start is through the landlord's complaints policy and then to the ombudsman, because they have the powers to order landlords on an individual case to make changes. If there is something about that failure that says something about a landlord level, so the reason why they failed was because their entire repair service isn't functioning properly, say, then that is something that we can look at as a referral and that we'll take into account. But I would really encourage people where it's an individual case to make sure that the starting point for that is with the Housing Ombudsman Service.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and just to echo that, Marion, in terms of, I'm sorry you've had to go through all that, but I hope that's helped in terms of a bit of advice to maybe take things forward. So thank you for your question. Okay, don't think I've got any more in the chat, so I don't know if anybody wants to ask some questions directly to Jack by popping their hand up and taking themselves off mute. If you want to do that, you can. Or you can still use the chat to pop some things in there as well. I suppose one question, Jack, that I was asked, which I thought was quite interesting, was about evidence gathering and the impact of involvement. I think, with Involvement Week, we do try and demonstrate the impact and the difference engagement has made. So I just wondered if you thought that was a particular strength across the board, or whether you feel that there's maybe work to be done in terms of gathering evidence to show impact.
So it's definitely an area where their work needs to be done. If you look at our inspection judgments around tenant engagement, we often talk about landlords who have mechanisms in place but need to go further to show that they're having an effect. The very best landlords are really able to show us, either in their board papers or in their policy development process, how tenants' views and co-production sometimes with tenants is really influencing the outcomes. That's the good end. What we see in landlords who've still got quite a way to go is that they have the arrangements in place. They've got the scrutiny panels. They've got tenant voice arrangements set up. But when we say, so what's changed as a result, that's the bit that they absolutely can't show us. So yes, it's really important. Some landlords are there. I would say our experience is that most landlords have got more of a way to go there.
Perfect. Sorry, everyone, my screen's just refreshed and I could see there was a lot of hands up and a lot of questions in the chat. I did think it was slightly odd that we didn't get questions coming in. So apologies for that. So I'll do a chat question and I'll come to the screen. So Kai's got a question around collecting data such as TSMs. Do you expect the landlord to offer more than one way of collecting data? Or if they just choose to collect it online, would that be okay? should they be giving more options?
Okay, so we have, let's say, just under 1,000 landlords in the sector, and tenant satisfaction measures, that's TSMs, are one of the ways we understand what's going on in the sector. What we say is that landlords have to do them. They have to ask questions of their tenants, but they have some options about how they choose to collect that. And the reason for that is that all of those landlords are different. All of them can afford to do things in different ways. All of them, their tenants understand and can engage with surveys in different ways. So we expect landlords to be making that choice. There's a choice between face-to-face, online, SMS. They can do it over the telephone. About 2/3 of them do telephone calls. Most landlords that we come across have an alternative way of doing it, but we don't have explicit requirements saying that they must do that. What we do have is a general expectation that landlords provide access to their tenants. So if there was a landlord that was only offering one option and that was excluding groups of tenants, that would be a question that we would want to go and ask them. But there's no requirement that they offer all of the different ways of collecting tenant satisfaction measures.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, let's rattle through some more questions. So Melvin Utley, you've got your hand up. I don't know if you want to unmute and ask your question to Jack, please.
Hi, Jack. Basically, my question revolves around what I'd call like menu-driven policies. Basically, policies that are derived to what the landlord will just see as what they think is going to be give them a good result when they've had inspections. So they're just basically fulfilling the policy, and that'll give them a good result. And I wondered, do you look out for things beyond that? So beyond what would normally be a standard response to an inspection, do you look for alternatives and maybe innovation? And are you just letting the landlords tick a box? Yes, we've done this. Yes, we've done that. Does it go beyond yes or no?
Yeah. Thank you, Melvin. That's a really helpful question. So a couple of bits to my answer on that. So the first thing to say is that our standards are about minimum expectations. So they're the minimum that landlords must do. There is lots of space above that for innovation. And I have to say, my personal view is that regulators aren't necessarily great at regulating innovation. It's not the best thing. It's not the thing that we're really good at. And that places like TPAS Involvement Week are really good places to push innovation. But what we do when we go and look at landlords through our inspections is ask one really important question that often changes how our inspectors view what landlords are doing, which is about how have the tenants involved in this, whatever the mechanism is, whether the scrutiny panel, whether it's tenant voice, resident committee, customer committee, whatever it is, how have they set the agenda for what's happening? How have they influenced the things that they are scrutinizing? How have they decided what's going to be on the agenda? And our experience is it's that question that opens up where landlords have been doing that slightly more tick box approach. So they bring we're going to talk to you about the things that we've decided we're going to talk to you about. And actually it's the tenants who are bringing their experiences. Well, that's not where the problem is. The problem's over here. So those are the questions that we ask. We don't expect to see landlords cutting and pasting from other people's outcomes. And there'll be lots of landlords who are going to landlords who've got the best inspection grades and saying, tell us what you did. And I don't think that's a great way of doing it. Our inspectors are out there saying, why does it work in your area? Not why does it work down the road, or why did it work when you went to see that training session? So yes, we're pushing landlords on, is it right for your area? Importantly, we're pushing them for what is it that the tenants that you're engaged with are telling you are the needs, how are they setting the agenda? And if they don't have strong answers to that, you'll see that coming out in our inspection judgments.
Thanks, Jack.
Perfect. Perfect reply for me. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask Rachel next, because I noticed she'd popped a question in the chat and she's also got a hand up. So I'm presuming it might be the same question. So Rachel, if you want to come in.
Hiya. Yeah, I'm from Alliance. We're in North Somerset, and we are really focusing heavily on our engagement programme at the moment. So we know our audit is coming from the regulator. We're waiting for it. We're excited about it. We'd just like to know a little bit more about how our tenants will be involved in that process of the audit, and if it's more along the lines of what are you doing and we believe you, or we've been obviously trying to focus on how we can prove how our customers have been involved and how heavily we engage them. And we would just like to know what sort of level the audit will take to actually reach out to those customers and say, how has it gone for you and what do you think?
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. And this will be interesting for anyone who's potentially involved in work with the landlord, because our inspections, and we recognise that inspections can be a slightly tense time for landlords. And if you're an engaged tenant and you're being asked to come and ask questions from the regulator, that might be intimidating or unnerving. So the basics about what we do. When we go into a landlord, one of the first things that we'll say we have a scoping session before, we'll tell a landlord, and then they'll have about 6 weeks to prepare things for us. During that scoping session, we will say, if we don't already know, can you tell us what your engagement mechanisms are? What does your structure look like? How does it work? And then from that, we will want to do an observation of one or more tenant groups, so groups within that structure. And then we'll want to meet with tenants from that structure. Sometimes it's if there's one really obvious group, it will be all of the tenants from that group. Sometimes it'll be a collection of tenants from across the structure. And what we want to do is have that conversation without landlord present, unless there's a need for landlord staff to support their tenants, to get some independent reflections on how those mechanisms are working. The point of that isn't to test the tenants. So if any of you on the call are tenants and you're going to be involved in those sessions, it's not a test of you. It's a question of, Rachel will have told us this is how it works in practice, and we'll want to know if that's the experience. And sometimes that's where we've seen that issue I just talked about agenda setting. Landlords have been really positive about their experiences, but actually the tenants are saying, well, we want to talk about this, and they never let us. So that's the conversation that happens there. And then beyond that, if we have concerns in tenant satisfaction measures or any referrals that come to us or anything that comes up in the inspection, we might want to ask to do specific focus groups or go out. In our model, we talk about potentially using estate walks and things. So those would be things that we have available to us if we feel like we need to for that particular inspection. And any tenants that are involved in that meeting with us would get a letter from us explaining what that's going to be about and how we're going to do it. It's an area where we're really looking to improve our practice all of the time. So if you've gone through that process, or once your tenants go through that process, Rachel, kind of feedback from that to the regulator is always really welcome.
Thank you, Jack.
Brilliant, thanks. So I've got a couple of hands still showing on the screen, and I know there's some questions in the chat. So I'll go to Alicia if you want to ask your question, and then I'll come to the chat next.
Hi, Jack. We recently were on the same stage talking about scrutiny and the fact that landlords still, in a lot of instances, will control the agenda. And I'm looking, we have now had the tenant's voice and this low-level engagement for a couple of years now. And what we are finding as a group of informed and involved tenants is we are still a long way from co-production, which isn't surprising when you know how the struggles we're having with scrutiny. To me, I want to know how we can use, as tenants, we can use the C rating. I mean, I will tell you already that I've made it one of my projects to look at the Social Innovation Fund, which is supposed to involve tenants at the level of co-production. And I'm already getting feedback that things are happening before we're involved. Now, that innovation fund is very specifically about us being involved in co-production, which means from the very first meeting, we need to be involved. How can we as tenants, which I notice is coming up in some of the questions in a roundabout way, how can we use the information and what you are doing, how can we use that to hold our landlords more to account?
Great, thanks, Alicia. It's lovely to see you again. So there's a couple of bits in there that I think is really important. So firstly, absolutely agree that the purpose of having regulatory standards is that everyone involved understands what they are and that they're used in that. I talked about that relationship between tenants and landlords. We want our standards to be used to support both sides of that arrangement. So doing things like this, and hopefully, Louise, we can send around those regulatory standards afterwards. I can see a couple of questions about that.
Yeah.
There are some really specific bits in there that say that meaningful bit, Alicia, about engagement with tenants speaks to me about needing to be involved before those decisions are made. And meaningful influence is about happening before decisions are made at the kind of the start of the process. So I would be hoping that tenants can use those standards and say, well, actually, landlord, in this engaged tenant group, can you tell us how you're delivering this bit of the standard? And that's where being able to get into the detail of it is really helpful. So we'll send those around. You mentioned the Social Innovation Fund. Just if people aren't aware of that, that's the Ministry of Housing, Community Housing and Local Government. I always get those letters in the wrong order. Have launched a fund that's not a regulator fund, but it should be a space in which money is available to grow some of the innovation that Melvin talked about earlier. And I agree, Alicia, that that talks about co-production. It's really important that people are doing that well. It's not our bag, but I know the timelines there are really tight, so I hope people can engage with that.
Perfect. Okay, one question from the chat, and then I'll come to you, Rob, because I know you've been waiting patiently with your hand up. But the question in the chat is, does the regulator recommend customer representation on the Housing Association board?
We don't make recommendations like that because that's not our thing. So if I go back to the outcomes based, what we say is that there needs to be strong governance. So there's the governance standard, like the one I just talked about in terms of engagement, and that needs to have the skills and capacity necessary to run the business. And we also talk about the engagement of tenants in influencing and scrutiny. Some landlords choose to include tenant or resident or customer, whichever version of that you want to use, as a member of their board, as part of their way of doing that. If they're a member of the board, they're a member of the board, and that's part of the governance structure, and they need to be supported to do that. We don't have a requirement that says that they should or shouldn't do that because it works differently for different landlords. So our question is about what have you chosen to do? How does it meet our standards, and are you doing it effectively? Rather than specifically saying it should be this model or it shouldn't be that model. Part of the reason for that is that our smallest landlord has 2 homes and our largest landlord has over 100,000. And the difference between those two things is really great. And obviously for local authorities compared to private registered housing associations, some of those governance structures are really different. So we don't have a specific line on that, but if a landlord chooses to do that, they need to support the tenant like they would support any member of their board. And they also need to have those meaningful engagement, the wide range of meaningful opportunities for others.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Jack. And Rob, thank you for your patience. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hi, Jack. So this is quite a specific question. So I see when I read through your documentation that you look at around equality and diversity. Mm-hmm. But as someone who sits within two marginalised groups, both being disabled and gay, I don't understand what the evidence would be that that the housing associations have actually taken any account of the specific problems that come up for those groups.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. And that's a really helpful question to unpack a couple of the bits that are in our standards. So we do have two specific standards that are around, we talk about diverse needs, because the reason why the standard says diverse needs rather than a different version of capturing that is that we didn't want it to be restricted to protected characteristics. So if people have experience, in the Equality Act, there's a kind of very defined list of protected characteristics, so we expect it to be wider than that. And where we expect landlords to use that information about diverse needs in engagement. So if we're talking about engagement, the act of engaging tenants, then we want landlords to be delivering their part of that in a way that's accessible for all. So we will ask questions during our inspections around, can you tell us how you make these engagement opportunities available? What have you done to change your practice? That's the kind of shape of question you'll get from an inspector. How have you changed your practice here in order to make it accessible for everyone? The bigger question about social housing, Rob, is how do you make sure that your landlord services are working for all of the people who live in your homes? So one of the major failings that we're finding in landlords, and there's a question about one of the frequent failings, is that landlords couldn't give us details about the kinds of people that they have living in their home. So they might not have detail on different kind of demographic information about the people who live in their homes. They might not have very detailed information. So, and interestingly, Rob, disability and sexuality is one of those things that often schools landlords didn't have great data on. And we're not saying that they absolutely have to collect that information about all of their tenants, but they need to know who's living behind their doors. And the second order question we then have is, so tell us how you've changed your services. What do you know about the outcomes of your services? So do your complaints look different if you look at different groups? Is your repair service performing differently for different groups? So those are the questions that we ask landlords. And one of the things that we are finding, and if you look at particularly our C3 outcomes, but also our C2 outcomes, landlords haven't got that information, so they're not able to make those changes. So that's why we're saying they're not delivering the outcomes of our standards. That's at the kind of the landlord level. When I think about individual homes and people's experiences in their individual homes, I won't talk for the Housing Ombudsman Service, but they've done a lot of work about the fact that landlords have failed, not because they haven't delivered the specific requirements for that home. They've gone and done the repair or whatever it was that was needed, but actually they haven't taken account of the Ombudsman uses vulnerabilities as their way of describing it. They haven't taken account of that collection of other things that are going on. So between us and the Housing Ombudsman Service, those are the kind of different ways in which we're
if I can come back to you, because one of the things I'm aware of is, and I'll use an actual example. We had a lift that broke down in my block. Mm-hmm. That meant I was stranded in my flat for 4 weeks. So I made a complaint. The complaint went through the process. Everyone did their jobs right, and they came back with no, we did what we had to do because we kept everybody informed that this was going to be a problem. Mm-hmm. So when that turns up, it's a resolved complaint. They hit their SLAs in terms of fixing the problem, but nowhere does it show that it affected vulnerable tenants.
Yeah.
When I talk about that, so when we're looking at the regulation and we're going, so what is it that could be within the regulation that would allow in the reporting to show that housing associations had taken account of vulnerabilities? It's that sort of thing, because everyone's doing their job and it's all being done and looks like it's great, and it is, except for the outcome for the individual, for the tenants behind the door, is that they are isolated and trapped.
Yeah.
So it's just that was really my point, is that the regulations are great, but if you're going to say that it's about you are being aware of how this affects vulnerable groups, somewhere in how it is either audited or reported should be a section to go, well, specifically, what have you done that would affect vulnerable groups?
Yeah. Great, that's really helpful. And Rob, that sounds really rubbish. I'm really sorry you had that experience.
You know what? They answered every phone call. They responded as they could. They kept people in. They kept us all informed. But I mean, I have mobility issues, but the lady next door to me had 2 children under 5 and was trying to get a pram up and down 4 flights of stairs. So it's just there is this gap, this little gap that goes right. So you're doing your job, get all that, but when we report it, how do we understand that there are vulnerabilities that aren't just about was it done within the SLA?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Just going to the chat now to get through these questions. So a question from Mitch around the transparency, influence and accountability standard. What are the most common failings that you're encountering during inspections, Jack, would you say?
So we're about 18 months into our inspections. So we're still not talking about kind of groups of landlords here. So these failures have turned up everywhere, just to make that important context. The things that we most frequently pull out as failings or weaknesses, there's one that's around just not doing tenant engagement. Like there are a surprising number of landlords where we've gone and said, you just don't have this. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's common. I would say it's very important and something we're really focused on. In terms of the wider TINA, that point that I talked about in terms of agenda setting and influence of tenants in the process, we're seeing more landlords in that kind of middle space where we're saying, actually, you've got things to fix here because they've got the structures, but they haven't got the tenant voice because they're driving everything to tenants. Around performance information, making sure that tenants are getting performance information about landlord services in ways that are open and transparent and properly supported. There's a lot of information out there. Tenants are often volunteers. Landlords should be scaffolding that information and helping them find their way through it in a way that doesn't hide the warts, but make sure that tenants are able to get access to it. So we're seeing some of that. And then the accountability and transparency piece. So we talked a bit about data just now with Rob. It's clearly an issue that landlords across the piece are facing, and then telling us how they've made changes in outcomes as a response to that data. And then complaints services. The Housing Ombudsman Service produces a lot of information about how landlords handling complaints, and unsurprising that we are finding a number where we don't think they're delivering an effective complaint service. So those would be the big things. At individual landlord level, there's lots of really there's stuff that isn't necessarily scalable. So large national landlords where we're saying actually your main structure is working well, but you haven't got regional stuff happening. Local landlords where they only have one mechanism that doesn't involve different groups of tenants. That stuff I wouldn't say is a kind of a theme across landlords, but is particular to those individuals.
Brilliant, thank you for that. A couple of comments from, I'm sorry if I pronounce this wrong, but it's all kind of merged into one. I think it's Marola Suadi. Some follow-up about the impacts. Do you have any case studies or specific examples? Well, I know the regulator doesn't really do that sort of thing, but certainly at TPAS, we will be able to share with yourselves some examples of the differences that have been made by engagement, and certainly throughout this week we can do that. But I don't know if there's anything, Jack, you wanted to follow up on that at all.
So Louise is right. TPAS for where it's working well. We publish something we call our regulatory case review. It's on our website. There's a short video explaining what it is, but there's a bit in there about tenant engagement. And what it talks about is actually where we found stuff that wasn't working. So I think if I were working in a landlord working with tenants, I would want to be reading that and saying, well, how sure am I that we're doing this stuff right, that this other landlord wasn't? And if you're an engaged tenant on a group and that chimes with your experience, I would be taking it along and saying, actually, look, the regulator's already said this is a problem in another landlord. If they come to inspect us, then we can expect a similar outcome.
Brilliant. And just a bit of a kind of heads up on the work that Kai Jackson's doing for us on the Seat at the Table programme. Kai's collecting good practice case studies on how to engage more effectively with ethnic minority groups. And, you know, if you want to contribute to that, please do, and do look out for the stuff. And we're hoping to collect more and more good practice case studies, because I know there's a big demand out there from people. So I hope that's been helpful. And we will get the link out to the website where you can get the standards downloaded. So I don't know if Lisa or Annie can pop that in as a reply to yourself. Yeah, sorry, having problems with sound. I think everybody else is all right. So hopefully, let's see if you've managed to fix that. Leslie's asking about the common areas of non-compliance. I don't know whether that ties into what you've just said to Mitch potentially. Leslie, was there anything more specific you wanted on that, wider than maybe the transparency, influence and accountability standards?
No, it was just general across the board.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that has been answered. Thank you, Jack.
Okay.
The themes that we didn't talk about, Leslie, that are in, if you look at any of the judgments where we haven't given C1, which is the landlord is overall doing the things we ask of them. It's around health and safety, and it's around stock condition. And those are on our consumer grade. Those are the fundamental issues that we're finding with landlords. And then, as it has been for a number of years, well, since the regulator has been set up, governance and financial viability. There are the things like you haven't done all your stock condition surveys, or you're not meeting your health and safety requirements. Those are symptoms of governance, and they often come together. So you'll often see that where we find failings in terms of consumer work, where we only produce governance ratings for the private landlords, not for the local authorities, but there'll often be weaknesses in that governance arrangement as well.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Yeah, just some comments on the Social Innovation Fund. I think that's going to be interesting to see how that sort of pans out. I know there's a lot of debate and discussion around that. Kai sending some good vibes to Rob for the questions. Rob, your questions were brilliant and insightful, which is good to see. And then I think we've got a question from Alexandra in relation to delivering something that is capable of making change. If as a housing association, we are engaging with the wider community without necessarily increasing the number of informally involved residents, but we're successful in bringing people together, would this still be considered a reasonable and meaningful step to achieving change? Yeah, I don't know if you've got a thought on that, Jack. I certainly have. So over to you first. So
there's a bit in Alexandra's question, which is around it's not necessarily increasing the number of involved residents possibly because of levels of trust. And I think that's a really important observation, Alexandra. What we're seeing is landlords moving to set up structures to involve tenants, but actually that's not the place that they're in with their tenants, and that they don't have those levels of trust, and therefore not many people are turning up because the offer isn't one that tenants want to take up. So we would absolutely say that if what you're doing is building a wide range of opportunities to engage with your tenants and explain what you are doing, and some of those aren't about, here's our latest complaints policy, will you please tell us what you think about it, because that isn't in the place that you're in. That's part of the journey and part of the thing that we expect landlords are going to need to be able to do to meet our standards. We don't have a specific thing in our standards about community engagement per se, but if you were wanting to tell us about what it is you're doing to engage tenants, those are things that are really important for us to understand the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important component, certainly from a TPAS perspective. What goes off at the grassroots level is so important for building that trust further up. and also it can make a real difference as well to other things that are happening, like health, well-being, that kind of thing as well. So I think it's a really good part of the menu of engagement, and certainly at TPAS we would look to support that, and it definitely does deliver some real lasting change. So thank you for pointing that out, Alexandra. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. We've got a couple of more questions. One from Andy asking me, can I share how tenants can see that housing associations are changing things from tenant feedback? Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting challenge. I think, again, I don't know whether Jack's got a view on this, and certainly I think from the reports that are being published in the feedback, it's still an area of weakness, where things are not necessarily evidenced or not reported. Some organisations are brilliant at it, and we can share some things. You know, they do a residence report, they do impact assessments, they do you said we did kind of things. So there is stuff out there, but it's certainly an area I think needs to be looked at and improved, and we need to do more at TPAS to support organisations to do that. So Jack, I don't know if you've got anything that you wanted to add to that from your perspective.
So I would just reflect on the start. I said that our grades are at landlord level. So sometimes you'll hear us talk about giving out C1s and C2s. I've done it a bit here. That's about a 4-point scale where we do our inspections. If you look at the inspection judgments for C1 landlords, those landlords that are delivering overall, we'll often pick out examples of where we saw that happen in practice. But that also happens at C2 landlords and at C3 landlords. But the inspection judgments are focused more there on the where we found weaknesses to explain that. So there's definitely those examples out there. We're seeing them in our practice. I think events like this and the work that you're doing, Louise, throughout the regionals to kind of promote some of that activity, I think it is really important.
Yeah, the regionals have been great, actually, because one of the challenges we've set them is to sort of collect or share with us what difference they've made. And, you know, the lists we've been pulling together have been tremendous. So on a wider sort of bigger picture, there is some really good evidence out there. I just think we need to get better at reporting it. So, yeah, good points. Thank you for that. Okay, just moving down. Yeah, shout out to Kai for her work from Alicia, which is great. Question from Alicia: are the regulator looking to deliver any spotlight reports similar to the Housing Ombudsman to help with wider learning, specifically around tenant engagement and involvement?
So, 2 bits. One, we do publish, not as frequently as the Housing Ombudsman, but we do publish reports on various thematic pieces of work. So we've done one on, there's been a number of landlords in our sector who have leasing arrangements that have been problematic. And we found lots of concern. So we published a particular thing about that. We've just published another one about stock condition surveys. So said to Leslie's question, one of the major failings that we're finding is around quality and coverage of stock condition. So there was one about that. There will be more in the future. I can't guarantee that it's going to look specifically at tenant engagement and involvement. But what I can say is if we start to produce those, it's a conversation I'm really regularly involved with internally about how can we reflect tenant engagement involvement in our findings here and what does it say. The first 2 were quite technical, so didn't have that. Ones in the future you can expect to see a bit more. So we might do, Alicia, have one like that, but I can't promise at the moment because we haven't set the topics out.
Thank you for that. Okay, we are coming up to about 12 now. So just to finish off with some comments, and I'll just double check there's not any further questions. Nice comment from Gail, saying she's a volunteer for a landlord involved in scrutiny, always invited to meetings and have a voice. That's brilliant to hear. Yeah. Alicia is looking for a cup of tea and a bread roll for 5D. I'm not quite sure. Is that all money? I'm not sure.
Yes,
but,
yeah, it's my poster. Yeah, we should also just do tenant involvement at the Royal Academy because the art is much better than it is in my house. So.
Excellent. Surely, question from Sue. Surely, Jack, as tenants pay your wages, you could produce a tenant engagement report. There's a challenge from Sue.
Well, as I say, like, we're looking at all the coverage of the reports, and I just don't want to promise a thing that we're not gonna get.
Yes, fair point. Always best to err on the side of caution with those things, but something to look at going forward. Okay, I have possibly gone through the 12 o'clock cutoff point now. We're at 12:01. David, I noticed you've got your hand up. We are slightly out of time. If you can make it super snappy, and I mean super snappy, we might be able to get you a response from Jack. So do you want to unmute yourself and throw in your question?
Yeah, thanks. Are there any seismic issues between small and large organisations giving information out to the tenants and engagement when you're going from, say, 500 property portfolio up to maybe 120,000? Is there a seismic issue there? Thank you.
Yeah, so we definitely see lots of differences. I talked about large landlords getting inspections. So we have if you look at the distribution of landlords in our sector, so how many we have with different sizes, we have a lot of landlords with fewer than 1,000 homes, and they don't go through that inspection process. They get regulated in a slightly different way. So that's one of the reasons why, because the expectations, particularly around very small landlords who rely on volunteers, so like co-ops and other forms of landlords. So that's the big shift we see between different sizes of landlords.
Perfect. Excellent. Super snappy. So I love that. We're going to bring things to a close now. Just to say a massive thank you to Jack for coming along and doing the session. Lots of positive feedback for yourself, Jack, as usual. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us, for all your contributions and for being here and for being part of our National Involvement Week. So we do hope to see you again at lots of our other sessions this week. Go online, celebrate, tell us what you're doing and show us what the impact is that you're making. So thank you again, everybody. It's been a delight to see you all. Look after yourselves and see you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.